Hi, good afternoon. Can someone give me a sound check?
We can hear you, Megan.
Hi
Thank,
there, we can hear you.
thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed lunch. On behalf of DBHDS, I'd like to welcome you to the afternoon portion of the Behavioral Health Symposium. Again, my name is Megan McGuire. We will have Catherine Crosby, the DEI officer of DMAS, joining us shortly, and I will get us started. Let's see, this morning we have many, oh, there's Catherine. Hi. Are you ready to take over? Let's see. Hold on, you're still muted. Hold on one moment. Let me see if I can help you. Okay. Well, let's do this. I will introduce the first speaker, and then we'll come back and we'll get your tech issues sorted out. Okay. All right. Wonderful. Thank you. This morning, we heard from many distinguished speakers and an excellent keynote speaker, and we learned a whole lot about the importance of the DEI initiatives. We really learned more of the why behind DEI and got a better understanding of how DEI initiatives have evolved from a statewide and agency and public and private community level. We learned more about implementing DEI policies, no matter what level your organization is on, and why it's so important to change the narrative and what it takes to walk the talk. So we're really looking forward to learning more with you this afternoon. We've got 3 experts in their fields, all of which we're really honored to have with us here today, and they'll share their words of experience and wisdom with us for the next several hours. They will be speaking on topics that are intended to deepen your understanding of healthcare equity and across the lifespan and for special populations. So I have no doubt that you'll be able to put these lessons learned today into practice. As I mentioned this morning, there's something here for everyone. So I will work with Catherine so that she can come on and tell you about the flow of the rest of the day. But quickly, we'll first introduce Dr. Randall Dent. Dr. Dent is a researcher in the field of public mental health for the Fitzhugh Mullen Institute for Health Workforce Equity. Broadly, her work focuses on improving mental health and well-being of Black Americans with specific focus on Black college students and emerging adults. Dr. Dent was a National Science Foundation graduate research fellow at VCU and a behavioral health equity research intern at DBHDS. So she was with us not too long ago, correct? Wonderful. Dr. Dent will be speaking to us today about engaging and supporting transition age youth and emerging adults in mental health care. As a reminder, there will be an opportunity for questions. Over to you, Dr. Dent.
Thanks so much, Megan. So I will share my screen. So I'm so excited to talk with you all today about bridging the gap, engaging and supporting transition age youth and emerging adults in mental health care. If at any time any of the panelists can't hear me or if there's a disconnect, please let me know because it's sort of hard to see the chat. So first I will start with the learning objectives. And so I hope after this presentation, you will be able to understand emerging adults and transition age youth through a developmental lens and where they are developmentally. That you will be able to describe the mental health challenges that are faced by transition age youth and emerging adults, that you will be able to discuss, hopefully with your colleagues, about the experiences that transition age youth and emerging adults experience when they are transitioning from the child to adult mental health service system, and that you will be able to envision ways that your organization can engage transition age youth and emerging adults from your own community. So a few definitions. Emerging adulthood is typically defined as the developmental period between 18 and 26, and sometimes even up to 29. The term transitional age youth starts a little earlier, and so it spans from older adolescents, so 15 to 16, to again, that 24 to 26-year-old range. It's really distinct from early adolescence in that both emerging adults and transition age youth are taking greater responsibility and agency over their lives. There's a lot of changes that are happening during this time, which makes it an incredibly diverse developmental period for all the things that can be occurring. So what does it mean to be an emerging adult or transition age youth? And so we know that they might be in college or finishing up high school. They might be working full time if that's the path that they're going. They might be a parent. They might be married or partnered. So there's a lot of different life changes that are going on during this time. And they're all happening concurrently. And so one thing I always like to discuss is about the changes in identity development. So emerging adults and transition age youth are really trying to figure out who they are, who they want to be, what they want for their lives, in addition to the other changes that are happening in their lives in terms of, job and career changes. They might be getting in and out of relationships. They may move from living with their parents to living with a roommate or living on their own. And lastly, there are always changes in parental involvement in that parents typically get a little less involved as their kids are growing older and are able to take more autonomy over their lives. So why is it important to engage emerging adults and transition age youth in mental health services? So statistics show that between 50% to 75% of behavioral health disorders start between the ages of 14 and 24. And so that's one reason that we should be making sure that emerging adults and transition age youth know what resources are available to them. And so they may be particularly vulnerable during this time. It's a really exciting time for transition age youth and emerging adults, and they're so adaptable and incredibly resilient. And so many mental health programming activities and services should really be building upon this adaptability and resiliency. So now I will share a quick video about COVID-19 and mental health, because especially during this time, it's already a tumultuous time and a lot of changes, but experiencing that during the pandemic is a lot for emerging adults and transition age youth. And I always think it's good for us to hear from the teens themselves.
I'd say 6 months ago that I was pretty much a typical.
Having a little bit of technical difficulty. Hold on 1 second. I'm just going to make sure that. So we will see if we can get it to work, and if we can't, we will just keep it moving.
I'd say 6 months ago that I was pretty much a typical teenager.
I had this anxiety and stress of school.
Stress.
So that is okay. We will just keep it moving. But really during this video, what the teens were sharing is their experiences during the pandemic and the transitions that they have had to go through in terms of adjusting to online schooling and being away from their friends, and those kind of issues that were coming up during the pandemic and are continuing to come up during the pandemic. And some of them really talked about how during this time they have really felt kind of isolated, and that in some ways social media has helped them stay connected with their friends. And for some teens, it's really helped them stay connected with their family that they haven't been able to see. And so when we're thinking about mental health for emerging adults and in other transition age youth, it's really important to think about the context that they're living in, especially right now.
I'd say 6 months.
And so in terms of emerging adults and transitioning youth, we find that they often underutilize mental health services. And so a recent study showed that only 54% of young adults age 18 to 25 who perceived that they needed mental health services were able to utilize them. So this equates to approximately 2 million young adults that are not receiving care when they need them. So what I want to talk about on this slide is really what is the experience like for transition age youth and emerging adults as they are going from the child mental health system to the adult mental health system, and what are some of the concerns that they might have. And so their first concern is really about a dramatic culture shift. They're concerned that they won't have the same amount of support that they had in the child mental health system. They're also really concerned about losing that relationship that they've built with their child mental health provider. And so they're kind of concerned about restarting with someone brand new and having to reshare all of the things that they've spent time, sometimes over years, discussing with someone that they've built trust with. And one of their other concerns is that providers won't be able to understand like where they are with their lives, with many providers being older. And so there's a couple of things that I'll talk about in later slides about that. But there are some positives that they experienced during this transition from the child to adult mental health system. And one of them being that they feel a lot more autonomy over their care. And they're able to really engage in shared decision-making with their providers in a way that maybe they haven't had to do before, or haven't had the opportunity to do since their parents were heavily involved during a lot of their mental health services. So next I want to talk about a few barriers to care for transition age youth and emerging adults. And so many of them have financial concerns, or they may not have insurance. They are, like many populations, experience stigma and are concerned about what people might think of them for receiving care. And for emerging adults and transition age youth, embarrassment is one of their main barriers to care, because sometimes they feel like they can't share with their parents, or they want their parents to know that they're growing up. And so they don't want to admit that they might need help. And they really showcase a preference for self-reliance during this time, because they're trying to prove that they can be independent. But I think one of the conversations that it's really important to have is around that asking for help is also a sign of growth, and knowing when you might need some extra assistance. So one of the most important barriers to care for emerging adults and transition age youth is really they might perceive that they lack knowledge about their own diagnosis. But one thing that I've found is, and they know a lot more than they think they do. But in trying to figure out how to navigate the healthcare system, they might not know much about that, since their parents have been like really, for a lot of them, their parents have been really present in helping them do that. And so they might be unaware of the different services or insurance coverage that they might have, or how to figure out who's covered and where should I go, those kind of questions. And they might not even know how to find a therapist because they didn't find the first one. And they might have anxiety about what that first session with an adult mental health provider would look like. And so many transition age youth and emerging adults experience what's called a transition cliff. And so sometimes they find themselves without professional support or a referral to an adult service. and they kind of feel like they are really kind of out there on their own without the support that they need. And so in the next couple slides, I will talk about what can we do and how can we try to the best of our ability to avoid this transition cliff. So again, why should we try to get emerging adults and transition age youth engaged in services and mental health promotion activities now? We've found that they're just learning how to navigate the healthcare system, and that can be very difficult and overwhelming, even for adults who have been dealing with it for, the entirety of their lives. And so if emerging adults or transition age youth are engaged with mental health services now, and they have the resources or the knowledge of how to access resources or where to go if they have questions, hopefully they will be more likely to engage in mental health services as they grow older, and they'll know where to go to ask questions. And to do this, we really want to build the bridge. And so one way that we get emerging adults engaged in mental health care is to keep them engaged as they transition to adulthood. And so it's important for parents and mental health providers to be talking early about the transition and what it might look like, in making sure that they are partners with transition age youth and emerging adults in preparing a transition plan. And so in a lot of ways, there will need to be structural supports that are built. And so one example is having a designated transition team within the current and child adult mental health service systems to help kids understand what comes next. And a number of states have transition services that are specifically focused for 16 to 19-year-olds. And so here are a few recommendations for positive transition from the child to adult mental health service systems. And so before the transition, as I said, it's really important to talk early on about what the transition to the adult mental health system will look like, and engage youth in planning their own transition. And really, the more ownership that they can take over the transition, the smoother it can be. And so during that transition, I think one of the most important things is for gradual and flexible timing of the transition. In a lot of the work, youth often feel that that 18-year-old age point is just, it's so arbitrary that all of a sudden they don't have the support that they might need. And for some transition age youth and emerging adults, that will be fine. They don't need that extra support, but for others, they might need a little bit more time. And so being able to be flexible with them is really important. And again, during the transition, it's really important to encourage autonomy and decision-making, and talk with them really about through that decision-making process for their different treatment plans. And after the transition, it's important to remind young adults that they have a choice about parental involvement, and some emerging adults may want their parents to be more involved, and others might want to really be autonomous and do it on their own. And what I will also note here is about informational continuity. And it kind of gets at one of the points I made on a previous slide about youth feeling like they have to share their stories for the very first time. And so if we can have some sharing of clinical information, as long as it would best serve the young adult client between the child and adult mental health services, at least providers will have some kind of background about their new client prior to starting sessions. And then emerging adults won't feel like they're starting absolutely from scratch. And so what about emerging adults who have never utilized services before? Because that is another big group. And so I think what I've found to be helpful is making sure that there are age-specific, developmentally appropriate mental health services and programming for emerging adults. And so even before they utilize services, it's important to have different mental health promotion events so they know where to go when it's time for services. And so one way that we can really include emerging adults and transition age youth in the planning of those different activities is to include and value their voices on different committees and boards. And so I always remind myself and others that they're experts on their own experiences. And so it's really important that we not only see who they are, but we honor their identities and their experiences, and that we listen and figure out how we can put some of that into practice. And so some of the mental health promotion events that I've seen have been really focused on helping emerging adults and transition age youth make an informed, positive decision to engage in care. And so these health promotion events are really an opportunity to educate and dispel myths and to alleviate any anxiety that people may have about engaging in mental health services. And when we're designing the services, we need to make sure that in terms of timing, that it's during a time when emerging adults or transition age youth are able to come, and that the places that we choose are accessible. So it may not be that you're doing it at your organization, but that you're partnering with a school or something like that, that would be easily accessible to the transition age youth. And so I have on this slide a few program design considerations that are evidence-based and have been really helpful in helping in getting transition age youth and emerging adults engaged in care. And so young adults have really voiced their desire to share their story of their experiences, and the ability to do this will really help them stay engaged in more mental health promotion and programming. We've also learned that young adults want to hear from their peers and people who have been there and are in their same kind of age bracket. They want to hear from them because they trust them. They have their own expertise and they seem relatable. And so any opportunities for co-facilitation and collaboration, perhaps with a licensed clinician and a peer of their same age with lived experience of either experiencing mental health issues or utilizing services and what it was like, is really helpful for keeping emerging adults engaged in care. And one of the things that I've tried to do in some of my mental health promotion activities with emerging adults is really talking about and incorporating art and music. And so I've showed videos of rappers talking about their mental health and how they, in a lot of ways, pour it into their music, but also when they're utilizing services, what that has been like for them and how helpful it's been. So these are some evidence-based approaches that are successful in keeping young people engaged in mental health services. Just a few more program design considerations. I am not super familiar with TikTok and some of the other social media programming, but I think it's really important that organizations consider utilizing social media for mental health promotion campaigns. One of the reasons is that young adults are already using these platforms to receive information about mental health. Some of the information good, others of it not so good. So it's important to consider how your organization could be an accurate voice for mental health promotion during this time. And if you're like me and not super familiar with some of the social media programming, partnering with young adults can really help in terms of thinking about how the different platforms should be used to engage with young adults. And they can really help your organization, and that's another way to keep them engaged. Over the next two slides, I have examples of different activities that different states or organizations have used. For example, the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health has youth peer drop-in centers. And so this is an opportunity to have a supportive and stigma-free environment for young adults between the ages of 16 and 26, and they can learn different skills related to the transition that they're about to go through. And it's a really interesting way to have an opportunity to set goals and to talk about things that are not necessarily related to their mental health explicitly, but are just things that they might be worried about in the future. I did have another video, but in the essence of time and a few technical difficulties, I will skip this one. But I will just say that Needham High School is a high school that partners with a local mental health organization, and they have basically what is like a peer support program there. And it's been really helpful for young adults to be able to share what it's like during the pandemic and talk with one another. And also it's been used to share experiences with adults about what their teens might be going through during this time and ways to support them. I will also share with Megan a resource sheet, and I'll put some of these videos on there so you all can watch in your free time. So on the slide, I just have a few questions that your organization can consider when thinking about these transitions. And so one of the questions is, can your organization partner with your local health district to organize educational events focused on the transition to the adult health system? So mostly, of course, I've been talking about mental health, but during this time, it's a transition from the child to adult health system. And so those kind of things that I mentioned before about insurance and coverage and how to find a therapist, those kind of things that could be really helpful to partner with your local health district, because, you know, emerging adults are also going to need to find a primary care provider and things like that to keep them engaged in health services more generally. I also think that when we put mental health and physical health on the same level, it's really helpful in reducing stigma. And the last question on the slide is really about how you can partner with local schools or colleges to share resources that your organization can offer. And I think that's another opportunity just for emerging adults and students to know more about where they can seek resources from. So this is just a slide with some resources. And again, on the resource sheet, I will send to Megan that can be shared. We'll have all of this information. So now we have time for a 5-minute Q&A and stretch break. I try to incorporate those into many of my presentations because I know we spend a lot of time these days sitting at our desks. So. I can also take any questions during this time.
All right, I think everyone can hear me now. I think so. Thank you, Dr. Dent. Did you want to allow that stretch break before we get into the Q&A section or after?
Oh, we can do it right now.
Okay, so we'll just give everyone a couple minutes to take that stretch break, and then I'll jump right in with the questions that we have here. And you know what, to be wise with our time while everyone's taking that stretch break, I'm going to use this time wisely and just go back to the afternoon flow here. And I apologize, we are all at the whim of technology these days. Dr. Dent, I so enjoyed what you shared with us today. Before I do that, I am Catherine Crosby. I am the DE&I and Health Equity Officer at the Department of Medical Assistance Services, which is one of DBHDS's sister agencies. At DMAS, I lead the Office of Equity and Inclusion, which is dedicated to ensuring that all members of the DMAS community, both agency employees and Medicaid members, are safe, supported, respected, and valued, and have access to opportunities that intentionally promote and advance equity and inclusion. For today's afternoon flow, I will introduce the remaining speakers, and following their presentations, just like this one, we will hopefully have some time for questions. Please note you should use the chat function in Zoom to ask any questions you may have. Do not use the Q&A function. I did see a question in Q&A. That is okay, I can read that one. But henceforth, let's go ahead and use that chat function there. Also, like this morning, this afternoon session is being recorded, and we will share a link later on DBHDS's website where you can find it once it's been formatted and posted. Anyone who is deaf, hard of hearing, or needs real-time transcription for this information, please click the link that's in the chat. You will need to do the split screen or drag your screen side by side to enable you to see the slides and the transcription at the same time. And lastly, following the conclusion of our last presenter, Megan McGuire, DBHDS's Chief Public Information Officer, will provide you all with some very brief but important closing information about evaluations, where to find the symposium recordings, and how those that qualify will get continuing education units or CEUs. All right. Dr. Dent, do you think we're ready? Everyone's all good and stretched out for these questions?
Yeah, I'm like, I turned off my video so I could do a little bit of stretching myself.
Well, you stretch on. I will not interrupt your stretch break. We'll give it a couple more minutes. And of course, Dr. Dent, once you're ready, I'll look for your cue once your video comes back up.
Can you see me now?
All right. Yes, we are ready. Okay, so the first question that came in was a question that asked, can you address the additional challenges that transition age youth and emerging adults who are aging out of the foster care system face?
That's a really, really great question. And so while during this time, a lot of emerging adults and transition age youth do have parental support. Those that are aging out of the foster care system don't necessarily have that privilege. And so it's really important for let's say the Child and Family Services office to be somehow connected to the mental health services and making sure that they are forming that connection. And so that should they need mental health resources, that the connection is there. I also think that during this time, like I talked a little bit about flexibility in terms of transitioning from the child to adult mental health system. And I think the same is needed for transition age youth and emerging adults who are aging out of the foster care system. So gradual conversations about what are their next steps, and being able to support them in building those skills to transition out needs to happen obviously prior to their transition, but also in the first, let's say, the year out from transition. So making sure that, I would just say, like connecting the social services to the mental health services for some of these transition age youth and emerging adults.
Awesome, thank you, Dr. Dent. The next question we got was, are there any services designated for youth aging out of therapeutic foster care?
So that's another good question, another good related question. And I am not personally aware of any services that are designated for youth, like specifically for Virginia, because most of my work has not focused on the foster care populations. So I would be interested to hear if anybody on this call who works with Child and Family Services, because I'm sure they obviously exist, but I myself am not aware of the specific services that exist in the Child and Family Services.
All Right, and like Dr. Dent said, if anyone has any of those resources or knows any of them, please feel free to drop them in the link for everyone's consumption. Another question we have here for you, Dr. Dent, is do you have any behavioral health apps that might be useful for this population? I'm wondering if there are any apps that might be utilized to be adjunctive to therapy.
That's a good question. And what I've seen recommended for some of the, well, just generally recommended is the Calm app, and like kind of like meditation apps have been kind of useful, and like different breathing exercises. But I'm not aware of any other like specific behavioral health apps that are just for emerging adults. And actually, I think that would be a great idea. There are a number of organizations that I'll talk a little bit about later that have a lot of like online resources, but it's not necessarily in the form of an app. And I think, Catherine, it would be a good time to get started so that I have time to take a few more questions on the back end.
I'm not showing any additional questions here. Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Dent. I think we are concluded with your presentation.
Oh, sorry. This is I have another.
The next one. Okay,
Yes.
There we go. Okay, sorry everyone, that's on me. Dr. Dent will now continue with her presentation. Thank you.
So now I would like to talk a little bit more about considerations for emerging adults and transition age youth that are coming from marginalized communities, specifically different racial ethnic groups and LGBTQ emerging adults. So as I've noted, emerging adulthood is already a period of a lot of transition, but from emerging adults from marginalized communities, there are other factors that impact their mental health. So I'm thinking about interpersonal, institutional, and structural racism and oppression. And we know that there's a lot of research that shows witnessing or experiencing racism or sexism or another ism has extremely negative effects on mental health. And so talking a little bit about racial disparities in mental health care utilization, we see that Black, Latino, and Asian emerging adults are less likely to utilize mental health services despite them needing them. And when they do, they actually attend fewer visits in treatment. And I'll talk a little bit about the barriers to care that can explain some of the disparities in mental health care utilization. I think it's also important to note that young people of color may be less frequently referred to mental health services via primary care compared to white young adults. So that's another intervention point to consider. So for emerging adults of color, they're more likely to lack insurance. And we know that even when you have insurance, it can be expensive to access mental health services. A lot of my work has focused on the historical experiences of racism in the mental health care system, and then also the present day experiences. So emerging adults may have concerns about discrimination in physical and mental health care settings. They may have experienced themselves negative previous experiences within the mental health care system, and thus they have a lack of trust in providers. And so that might keep them from utilizing the care that they need. Additionally, the mental health system may lack cultural and linguistic understanding of these particular groups. And that is always a concern for emerging adults of color. Are they gonna understand me? And in some of my PhD research, I did find that one of the reasons that in my sample, I was looking at Black college students preferred Black counselors was because of this shared understanding that they weren't going to have to explain things that that were like really core to them. And that really kind of leads me into the next barrier, which is the lack of mental health providers of color. And in my work, I always advocate for creating a better pipeline into the mental health provider professions for emerging adults of color and adults of color more generally. And there is a stigma surrounding mental health that we know about and that may be more prevalent in some of these communities. For LGBTQ emerging adult mental health, LGBTQ emerging adults have reported both stigma and discrimination when they are accessing mental health services, which can keep them from utilizing services. But in terms of their mental health, I think like racism, experiencing homophobia and transphobia and people trying to get them to change their sexual orientation or gender identity. And actually a report by the Trevor Project found that 67% of youth reported that someone had tried to convince them to change their sexual orientation or gender identity. And so that is really negative for LGBTQ emerging adults and transition age youth. And I also like to point out the anti-trans bills that are popping up across the country. Those are having an extremely negative impact on the mental health for those in this population. And so I'll just share a few statistics from the Trevor Project report and a little bit about the Trevor Project. It is a nonprofit organization that is focused on the mental health of LGBTQ youth and LGBTQ youth of color. And they do a lot of great work in both advocacy work and research with LGBTQ youth. But what they found in one of their recent reports is that 71% of LGBTQ youth reported discrimination due to either their sexual orientation or their gender identity, and that they had felt the recent political climate had really impacted their mental health and sense of self. I think this is really important considerations to know about mental health for LGBTQ during this developmental period. So one of the barriers to care for LGBTQ emerging adults is both historical and present day, because like I mentioned on the last slide, there are many LGBTQ youth are reporting that people are trying to get them to change their gender identity or sexual orientation. And so what I've listed here is conversion therapy. And if you don't know what conversion therapy is, it's a dangerous and discredited practice that's aimed at changing an individual's sexual orientation or gender identity. And in the DSM, I believe it was like DSM-3, LGBTQ persons were thought to have a mental health disorder. So that was stigmatized and it was ingrained in that manual. And so many LGBTQ emerging adults have a concern that providers will pathologize their identity and won't really pay attention to the other things that are actually happening in their lives that is contributing to their mental health. And again, there's a lack of LGBTQ counselors, which really the emerging adults have concerns that providers won't be able to understand their sexual orientation or their gender identity, which can keep them from getting the care that they need. And like a lot of emerging adults, inability to afford care is always a big barrier. And specifically for transition age youth, not wanting to get parental permission to seek care can be a big barrier. Even if they are over 18, if they're still on their parents' insurance, then those are conversations that they might have to have that they wouldn't want. And I'll just quickly shout out Side by Side, which is another organization that serves LGBTQ youth in Virginia, located in Richmond, and they use some of the evidence-based practices that I have mentioned above, and that they have a youth leadership committee that's helping their organization plan and consult on different youth programming, engage in community outreach and education, and plan some of their annual events. And so I know that I have talked about LGBTQ emerging adults and emerging adults of color, but I also understand that emerging adults exist at many different intersections. And so one of the things that I always think is important to mention is that Black, Latino, and Asian men are much less likely to receive care than women. So it's also important to think about, stigma for them and how different mental health promotion activities and services are being tailored. I'll also note that Black, Latino, and Asian LGBTQ youth are significantly less likely to receive professional care. And so a few recommendations that I have, it all starts with building trust with emerging adults and with their communities. So that means being present in your community and partnering with community organizations that may serve young people or high schools, trade schools, 2- and 4-year colleges, and making sure that when you're doing events that you're advertising your services or events in different community spaces where young adults might actually be able to see them, or in this case, online or in different ways. One of the things that always rings true to me that one of my favorite deans from college told me when I started working with college students is, I asked her, how do you do this? And she said, I always meet them where they are. And so that continues to ring true. And I hear that as I do my own work. But some questions to ask are, is it possible to conduct events in a community space rather than at your organization? Or is it possible to engage with them virtually? And the answer to that second question in this case might be yes, and in ways that we had never envisioned that we would have to before. But I hope that as we hopefully emerge out of the pandemic, that some of these things that we've learned will stay with us. It's also important to create welcoming and inclusive spaces. And so that starts with sometimes where you're located, but also talking about your outreach materials, how accessible is the information? Is it readily and easily located on your website, things of that nature. And as I stated before, it's really important to connect with other social services because we know that, let's say, only 25% of health is actual health care. So it's those other social determinants of health that hopefully can be provided by other social services that will ultimately improve mental health for this population. And so in the interest of time, I will just briefly talk about the focus groups with emerging adults from marginalized communities as one way to figure out what their needs are and what would make them come to different activities, or what do they need to engage in mental health care. And really starting there helps you create tailored services that that emerging adults of color and emerging adults from other marginalized communities will want to utilize and will feel seen in some of these programs. And this is another resource list. And I would just like to quickly point out the JED Foundation and the Steve Fund, which are both organizations that are focused on mental health for young adults. And so the JED Foundation is more of the broad population, and the Steve Fund is specifically focused on emerging adults of color. And so I would definitely encourage you all to look at those foundations. They have a lot of great resources about this age population that can be useful to you as you're thinking about what your organization would like to do next. And I'll just remind everyone that the ultimate goal for this age group is really fostering mental wellness for all emerging adults and transition age youth. And so we want to build trust with them, and we want to interact with them in places where they feel comfortable. and we want to let them know that we value them and their opinions, and we want to provide services that are useful to them and helpful to them. And we want them to be able to see themselves represented in the services that they are trying to see. So I just like to say thank you, and we should have time for a few questions. And if we don't get to your question, my contact information is listed on the screen.
Yes, thank you again, Dr. Dent. So I'll say someone wanted to add a comment to your presentation. So there was also some disparity that biracial emerging adults may be affected by as well. But we do have a question. I did hear that you said one of the barriers to care for emerging youth is the lack of LGBTQ plus counselors. I think it's a perfect seg for the question in the chat. And someone asked, do you think low pay is keeping Black youth from aspiring to be mental health providers? Should pay be increased for mental health providers?
Ooh, that is a great question. And I mean, my answer is yes, because they provide extremely valuable services. And when you compare the salaries of mental health providers to, let's say, master's level mental health providers to master's level nurses, the salary pales in a lot of ways in comparison. I'll also note that even for, let's say, doctoral level psychologists, like the pay is still pretty low. And there's not a lot of diversity in the doctoral level psychology profession as well. So, and yes, pay should be increased for mental health providers.
All right, does anyone have any last minute questions they would like to ask Dr. Dent before we wrap up her presentation? If so, I'll give you just a couple of seconds to drop those into the chat. If not, we will move forward and take a quick break before we start the next presentation. Okay, well, any other questions that may come up afterwards, Dr. Dent, is it okay for them to reach out to you to get that information from you?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dr. Dent, for your time with us and sharing that very, very useful and helpful information. I know June is Pride Month, and so it's particularly important this month, but not just this month, for the rest of the year. Every month is important to make sure our emerging youth are cared for and seen and heard and respected. So thank you so much, Dr. Dent, for your time.
You're very welcome.
All right, so we'll just take a couple of minutes here and right at that 2 o'clock hour, we will get started with Dr. Mobley's presentation. So feel free to take a moment to use the facilities, get yourself some coffee or something to drink, take another stretch break. I know if you're in Richmond, where I am, it is thundering, so maybe look out the window, enjoy a little bit of that rain, and we will be back precisely at 2 o'clock. Thank you.
Catherine, can you hear me, see me? My speaker wasn't working before.
Yes, I can hear and see you.
Perfect.
Let me just give it just a couple more seconds to be right at 2 to give everyone just a second to get back. All right, and it is now 2 o'clock. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you again, Dr. Dent, for your remarks and the information you shared with us today. And so now I'd like to bring our morning MC, Dr. Tanika Mobley, back up to the spotlight. As you all know by now, Dr. Mobley is the DE&I officer at DBHDS. On a personal note, I have truly enjoyed working with her in the time that I have been at DMAS. She is truly an inspiration, and I learn something new and wonderful every time I talk to her. Prior to coming to DBHDS, Dr. Mobley held roles as a sports psychologist, researcher, author, and educator, where she collaborated with other sports researchers to create toolkits for youth and their families on ways to understand the power of sports and the physical activity in teaching pro-social behaviors, socialization, and positive affective experiences. Dr. Mobley is a certified trainer in emotional intelligence through Yale University's Center for Emotional Intelligence, and today she'll be sharing some of this knowledge with us as she discusses the vital intersection between diversity, equity, and inclusion and emotional intelligence. Similar to Dr. Dent's presentation, we will have a Q&A period, but that will come after Dr. Mobley has completed her presentation. Again, please use the chat function for that. We look forward to hearing this. Dr. Mobley, over to you.
Catherine, can you see this in full screen or no? Is it in slide screen?
It's still in slide.
It's in slide
Okay,
screen.
just wanted to make sure. Okay, okay. So good afternoon. I am glad to be rejoining you all today. I'm excited about having this conversation. I'm going to take a different approach today, a little bit than some of my other counterparts. They have done such an amazing job. So I decided to deviate just a little bit because I know one of the challenges with this virtual world that we're living in with Zoom calls is that I know I'm the type of person, I like to move around, and that can be really difficult, but I do want to hear your voices as well. So we're going to have a discussion today about the intersections between DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how there's an interdependent relationship with emotional intelligence, right? And so I'll get more into that, but I want to do and talk a little bit about some housekeeping items. First and foremost, I'm hoping each of you has a pen and paper. I know we can get in at least one activity, maybe two, depending on the time, depending on questions. Hoping that we can get through all 3 activities. I am a believer in having diversified learning styles, the needs met. I'm a former educator, so I recognize that everyone needs to learn in a different way. And so oftentimes in these Zoom calls, we don't get to do this kinesthetically like we do in person. So I'm gonna try to at least get us thinking and moving and sharing a little bit today. And so under that guise, I also wanna make sure that you understand that whatever I'm asking, this is voluntary participation with the idea that I know we have a very large group of people, but still we want to create this safe space to have this dialogue and conversation. Oftentimes when we're talking about DEI focused and DEI forward issues, it can be challenging, and oftentimes it can be difficult to navigate those conversations in a way that's not difficult for some to feel that they can share their voice. And so we want to create that openness. And last but not least, knowing that we have this focal point of DEI and emotional intelligence, which is going to be a lot of self-reflective work today, I want this to be a shared learning experience. I walk into every situation, sort of like what Catherine was saying, every time I have a conversation with her or, Megan, any, to various peoples, I had a conversation with Dr. Brown recently. It is a shared learning opportunity for us. And so I'm really hoping that we will learn from each other today, learn from each other's voices, and really have a chance to elevate the conversation. So that being said, I put the definition of diversity up there. This was more just because this is the one Virginia definition that we're using. So we sort of had this centralized language, but I like what Dr. Brown said, you know, diversity, it's basically, we all get to be present, right? So just truncating that definition and just thinking about it in its most simplistic terms, that's what we're saying. And equity, right? I think the definition she used, if I'm trying to recall, but you know, it was basically making sure that we all have comparable access to information and resources, right? That's the purpose of equity. And I won't like read through these because I know all of you are well versed in this information, but I always like to set that groundwork so that we're all operating from that same space, using the same language, you know, communicating the same definitions. And then inclusion, right? It's this idea, that last piece, really that sort of also goes along with belonging, that we often don't talk about the B as much, but that inclusive piece that says like, I'm here, but I also get to be valued and I actually get to say something, right? And I get to say something and I'm allowed to be here and my voice gets to be respected. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about DEI, when we're talking about historically disenfranchised populations, marginalized individuals. That's the work that we're all doing here. So under the guise, we're going to start our first activity. So get your pen and paper out. And what I'm going to ask you to do is you're going to write down your personal story with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what I mean by that is, sorry, I've got to move this. What I mean by that is how you began this work. So I want you to think about, when you think about DEI, you can think of it from 3 different prongs, whether it's how I began this work, if I'm a person who's a practitioner or I'm doing DEI work for my organization, or just why I love it. Why am I passionate about DEI? Why do I think about it? Why am I buying books on it? Why am I focused on being a change agent around the tenets of diversity, equity, inclusion? Or last but not least, why you feel that this type of work is a challenge. Now, you're going to write your personal story, but the caveat is that you can only use 6 words. And there is a point to this. So I want you to think about it. And it is not an easy activity. We're going to put a little music to kind of get the brain going. But you can only use 6 words. So you can start larger with like 10 or 12, right? And it's like this descriptor, and then scale it down. And then after you use those 6 words, I'm going to actually ask you all to share those 6 words in the chat. Because what we're going to be thinking about as we explore this idea of this 6 words of our personal story around DEI, you know, what does this exercise actually mean to me? You know, the purpose of why I'm here today, why I showed up in this space. What is my story behind what I wrote? And so even when you post your 6 words in the chat, you can put a couple sentences in there to explain it if you think it's difficult for us to understand, because Catherine's going to share some of them with us, because I think as a group, it'll be important to hear. And I want you to think about this story and how it shapes how you see and you work with people. Now, that being said, I put an example on there and I'm going to share with you. So I said 1 step forward, 3 steps back. Right? That's my relationship right now with DEI. That's how I feel. And what I mean by that is this work can be very challenging. And I'm going to talk about how it can be fatiguing. And that every time I make a step forward and I get that small victory and I feel like, yeah, I'm making some change. You know, we're really like, you know, we're moving here. The policies and the strategies that we're coming up with are really working. Oftentimes something happens and I feel like, geez, 3 steps back. We're doing that again. I thought it was going to be different. I thought we had made progress. And so we start climbing that hill again in that DEI field and saying, oh, okay, back to the drawing board. I thought the organization, or I thought the team, or I thought, you know, the individuals I'm working with were really making progress, and they're not. And so unfortunately, we have to keep plugging away and keep going up that hill. So Megan, I want you to cue up our music, and I'm going to give you guys about 2 or 3 minutes, right? And so for anybody who didn't get to have their little break, their coffee break, this is your chance to run and get water or something. But I'm hoping that people are really devising their stories and their words. And so Megan's going to put on a little music to get you going, and we'll reconvene and come back in about 2 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes.
It might seem crazy what I'm about to say. Sunshine, she's here, you can take a break. I'm a high way. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Here come bad news, talking this and that. Give me all you got, don't hold it back. Well, I should probably warn you, I'll be just fine. No offense to you, don't waste your time. Here's why. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Hey, go. Bring me down. Can't none bring me down. Your love is too high. Bring me down. Can't none bring me down. I said, bring me down. Can't none bring me down. Your love is too high. Bring me down. Can't none bring me down. I said, clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a roof without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you.
So about 30 more seconds.
You feel like that's what you want to do. Hey, go. Bring me down. Can't none bring me down. Your love is too high. Bring me down. Can't none bring me down. I said, clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth.
All right. Thanks, Megan. So Catherine, what do we have in our chats?
We have some great responses. We have heart is imperative, communication is key, no more censoring, just be you, slow, little movement impacted by fear, everyone has their own truth, children with challenges are equal inside, changing attitudes and opinions and engagement, admire human struggle, personal connection, empathy, walk a mile in my shoes, changing lives in my hometown. So many good ones. Do you want me to read them all? Because I certainly can.
Yeah, I mean, you're going quickly enough that I think you can share a few more.
Okay. Everyone deserves to feel understood and valued. Don't want to look back. Diverse groups in clinic setting, challenging, healing, compromise, wellness, overcoming barriers, solutions, representing all to help inner child in communities with like-minded people. Let's see here. Must use my privilege for good. Reflect, be open, persist, try, hope. I may have said this one already, changing lives in my hometown, build a better world for my daughter. Thought I knew, much to learn. I like that one a lot. Painful, passive pushback from intelligent peers, value what's inside to value others, keep listening, speaking, learning, trying and loving. It's a thing, get on it.
Yes.
Constant feeling of hot and cold.
Yes.
Equal opportunities aren't shared with all. These are so great. These are great.
All right, thank you. So thank you, first of all, for participating. I mean, the important part of this, and one of the reasons I also like to put stuff like this in the chat is, I don't know if any of you ever do this, but every once in a while, like when I participate in community conversations or I participate in anything, I actually go and cut and paste what people have been saying, because oftentimes there's some great quotes in there, there's some great resources, and I forget. And so one of the reasons I wanted this to be a part of it is because I wanted you all also to read the chats, but to have some takeaways from each other, not just from the speakers, because I think this is a great, again, shared learning opportunity. And I know, I read some of the chats myself, and I was like, wow, people really have some connectedness to this material, connectedness to this topic, in real intentional and meaningful ways. And so the reason why I used my example and the reason why I was really interested in this was that, trying to go to the next slide, was that when I was originally asked to participate, I wasn't really sure what I could add. I've been really fortunate at the agency to have some speaking opportunities, both internally and externally, and been able to really talk about the equity strategic plan that we're creating at DBHDS. But in that work, one of the things that has really come about is partnering with other organizations who maybe don't have DEI strategic planning yet. They may not have people in place who know how to deliver this work. And so what essentially I was finding was that people wanted to do the work, but it was becoming exhausting because there's a lot to it. It's complex, it's robust, it's uncomfortable. And if you are not someone who is trained to do this work, oftentimes it's hard to figure out, how do I even begin? How do I even approach it? So I wanted to talk about this because one of the things that I have noticed that I think is missing in the discussion around how do you create successful DEI strategic planning is, how do we enhance and increase the emotional intelligence of the individuals who are not just providing the deliverable, but who have to receive the information. And Dr. Brown talked a little bit about this morning, is really this self-awareness, this self-reflection, and I'm gonna pick the ball up on there discussing that. So conceptually, people are looking at this idea of what we're calling diversity fatigue. It's been defined as the stress, particularly for those of us who are doing this work for our companies or organizations, who are tasked with the hiring, training, and the retention, right? So oftentimes those are the DEI and HR folks who are tasked with making sure that we're achieving these DEI goals at our agency and creating this inclusive workplace. And where the fatigue comes in is it's that disconnect, right? That cognitive dissonance of working with individuals where, people say, hey, we're ready, we're excited, we want to do the new thing, but at the same time, we want to still do the old things, right? Because we want the change, we want to see it, but at what cost? What is it going to cost me personally, right? So what we have is, we have people who are saying things and doing something different, right? So they're not following through on the action. So it makes our job much more difficult, because then we have to manage those pieces and we have to continually reassess where we can have our entrance in trying to change a culture. But we also may sometimes have leaders that are promoting a mindset and an approach. It could be completely positive, it could be DEI forward, but it may not be reaching every tier of our organization. And so because it's not being produced and it's not being echoed throughout the entire organization, what then in turn happens is that you're going to have a DEI program that's not going to work because you don't have the investment, you don't have the buy-in that you need. And so it becomes exhausting for those of us who are doing this work. And so why are we seeing this diversity fatigue trend happening? So I'm sure plenty of you have read articles around all the diversity training that's happening, right? Everyone's offering a certificate somewhere. And you know what? There are some wonderful certification programs out there that really provide a wealth of information that will train individuals to really be able to do equity work in a meaningful, intentional, and impactful ways. But there are also a host of companies that have cropped up because it's become a multi-billion-dollar industry. And so we've seen this since 2003. there's been this boost in the DEI work and people sort of hopping on it who really aren't trained to do it. And as you can see, I put the quote, it's like speed dating diversity, right? It's like, hey, let's do some one-off trainings on bias. Let's do a one-off anti-racist training. And basically what people are doing is we're presenting information to individuals and we're letting them kind of pick and choose the parts that are comfortable so they don't really have to move outside of that space of discomfort to move into self-reflection and to think about how I'm showing up in the space and what that is bringing to the space. And so it's a term that's been coined as equity, diversity, inclusion, industrial complex, right? And we see that with other complexes, right? We talk about the prison, school to prison pipeline, and prison industrial complex. And it's really just sort of this oversaturation of one particular thing and an industry that keeps us from really doing the meaningful work that we actually want to do. And in turn, that's where we're having some of the fatigue and maybe some of the pushback that maybe we're seeing that creates some difficulties in really being able to do this work. So that's why, I'm a huge believer in emotional intelligence. I'm a believer in Peter Salovey, who's out of Yale University, whose work really centers around our ability to not only monitor our own emotions and feelings, but the feelings of others, right? That is a significant piece oftentimes that's missing when we're talking about our DEI work. Oftentimes we're saying, okay, we want you to self-reflect, we want you to think about you, and we want you to think about other people, and we want you to be empathetic, but asking you to be as discerning as you can and how you educate yourself around that information. And so we have to have a commitment to this work. And part of that commitment is helping people move towards what we call high EQ or high emotional quotient, emotional intelligence. Because we want people to be able to take that information that we're using and guide the ways, not only sort of our cognitive processing, but the cognitive processing and how it then informs our behaviors and our actions. And so generally, right, it helps us when we have high emotional intelligence, particularly in the DEI space, helps us navigate those social complexities that come with having to have those difficult conversations that we're really uncomfortable with, that we skirt around all too often, which is why we don't make change, particularly in the workplace, right? It's really, really tricky. I'm tasked with providing information and having celebrations of all of our marginalized populations or just everybody. I don't care, who it is. I try to celebrate every month. I've got a calendar and we're celebrating all kinds of folks and, I get excited, but I sent one out yesterday regarding LGBTQIA+ Pride Month. I got an email back from someone at the agency and all it said was no, nothing else, just no, right? And so that's what I mean about, but we have to boldly move into this space and say, no, I'm going to address this. We're going to keep having the conversation. We're going to keep providing you with information. We're going to keep being committed to celebrating and elevating these discussions. And I know people may be uncomfortable because maybe it's not something that you're familiar with or you don't identify or whatever that looks like for you, but we can't stop this work. This work has to go forward. So EI, how does that look actually in the workplace? So making sure that number one, we have self-awareness. And I'm going to show you this screen. I have another little screen. I apologize, but it's actually one of my favorite charts. And I just didn't have time to replicate it. And I decided to add it at the last minute. But I think it's important to provide that contextual information. So EI, how does it look in the workplace? Self-awareness, right? Recognizing our own feelings, our own strengths, and our own weaknesses. Self-management, being able to just regulate our emotions, our feelings, everything cannot be offensive to us. Everything's not about us. We should not be centering ourselves in every issue. And so what we need to do is think about how can I provide an empathetic space for other people? Social awareness, again, being able to read the room. I say this all the time, and this is one of the most challenging things, right? And actually it's probably good for me. I laugh because I used to work in higher education. I was a grad professor. And one of my challenges is that because I can see the faces of individuals, I'm constantly trying to read people's expressions to determine what's their interest level. And I would actually on the fly try to change my lecture based on 2 people out of 20, right? Because at the end of the day, I have the capability to be able to really kind of read those nonverbal cues, but I just really wasn't using it in the most valuable way. But that's what we're talking about when we're saying being able to read that room, to be able to understand your audience, to be able to communicate your messaging for a diverse group of individuals, right? Not just for those you're comfortable with, where you have sort of this affinity because there's this shared commonality that you believe you have, but that social awareness that says, my goal is to connect with everyone that I'm engaging with. And then relationship management, you know, again, I talk about empathy. And as I move to the other screen, and actually I'm going to go to it, and I apologize, a little fuzzy buzzy, but at the end of the day, I wanted you to see the hallmarks. When we look at self-awareness, there are certain hallmarks where you can say, hey, I am highly emotional intelligent. You will see it in how you show up with self-confidence. You will see it in how you can realistically assess who you are, what you bring to the table, and even sometimes your ability to have self-deprecating sense of humor, right? It's funny because I'm a person who, I love a good joke, I love to laugh. But you know, a lot of people, it's a challenge for them to be self-deprecating sense of humor. And that has a lot to do with who you are, what your context is, you know, where you've been. And so that can be a challenge. We look at self-regulation, openness to change. When you're doing DEI work, you have to have a willingness and an openness to be able to change who you are, change your thought process, change the way you behave, the way you speak, the way you act. That's a form of self-regulation that's high in not emotional intelligence, but also what we call cultural intelligence. Our motivation, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this in a minute, about one of the challenges about all of these terms before we get into our activity, but having organizational commitment. To do this work, you have to be motivated to do it because there has to be a commitment to the organizational mission, to the vision, to the values, because it is going to be tough. It is going to be hard. And so you also have to provide that same commitment level and expressing that and delivering it if you are the person who does the deliverable for your agency. Empathy, cross-cultural sensitivity. And that can be a challenge because what does that look like? You know, it's hard to know what that looks like. Well, you know what the easy way is? Ask the question. Don't be fearful. One of the things that when I work with people, the biggest thing that people say, why it's a struggle for them to embrace DEI trainings, strategic planning, is because they are so scared to say the wrong thing. And at the end of the day, you have to be okay with being wrong. You have to be okay with messing up. I always say, listen, you have to give people the grace to make the mistake if you want them to change. You can't ask people to invest and buy into something where they can't even make the simplest of mistakes. And so the empathy has to go both ways, right? Oftentimes when we're teaching the DEI piece, we're talking about, we want people to empathize with other people, you know, their barriers to access. But I also do posit that it has to go both ways. We also have to provide a space of grace for people to be able to slip up and make a mistake, right? When we know that it's not intentional, when there's no malintent. And then social skills. We want to make sure that people have the ability to not only lead and build teams, but that there is a spirit of cohesiveness. But I'm going to ask you really quick in the chat. There's one issue that I have with emotional intelligence, right, at large. When you look at these terms and you think of it from a DEI lens, right, an equity lens, self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, social skills, what's the one issue that you may have when you're trying to really help people develop these spaces from a DEI perspective? What's the one challenge? When you look at these terms, what's the problem with them? Anybody? I'm looking at my chats. I don't see any new answers. Catherine, do you see any new answers popping up? Ooh, I see one. I'm excited.
This one says lack of self-insight.
Lack of self-insight. That is good. Not what I was thinking of, but that is actually very good. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So someone else said all about me. There's willingness to change.
Okay. I see one more. I see a couple more.
Yes, yep, skills that are very different depending on culture. Another says it requires an empowered individual. One says this looks different for different people and culturally may be expressed differently. Another, people might think it's something you either have or you don't, rather than a skill you can develop.
Right.
Someone says externally initiated, and someone else said up to individuals who may have barriers to achieving these things. And lastly, need emotional intelligence to achieve these at all.
Yes. So there was a theme there, there was a pattern. And so basically that's right, it's subjective in its most simplistic terms. These terms are very subjective. And so the problem is if you're not culturally intelligent and you don't have the capability, you have not surrounded yourself, or you don't have the exposure or experience to have had a lot of intercultural communication, the problem becomes when you identify these terms, however that looks, whatever that culture looks like, right? Because that could even be, I'm on the seasoned side of life, right? And so oftentimes if there's an age gap there, there can be some misunderstandings, and the way we define like confidence and motivation will look very different. For someone, I mean, I'm not afraid to say it, I'm a Gen Xer. So that may look very different than someone who's in, who's identifies as, the generation of, I think it's Z, right? That our terms aren't going to be the same. It's going to show up differently. And so the problem becomes, that's why you have to have this like centralized messaging, this streamlined form of communication of how we identify this terminology in order for us to be successful. So what I'm going to ask you to do, I have another exercise. I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen for a minute because I need Catherine to share. Can you share the bubble map with us, Catherine? I think I stopped sharing. Okay, perfect. Okay. So for those of you who have your pen and paper, I want you to replicate this drawing. And I want you to think about this as you're replicating the drawing. This is called our social identifier bubble map. And what you have here are, hold on, I can't count, 7 circles. And so in the center circle, the first thing I want you to do is think of how you socially identify, how I show up in the world. And what's the first thing that comes to mind, right? So that means, whether you say I identify as female, I identify as male, I identify as African-American, I identify as, AAPI, I identify as an individual with disabilities, I identify as an individual who has transitioned out of incarceration. Whatever that one thing is, when you walk out of your door, it's the first thing that I think about that people will think when they see me. However that is, that you put first as your top identifier. And then after you pick that one, I want you to pick all the rest around the circles, right? So if you used gender as the thing in the center, then, the next thing may be age and however that looks. And so I want you to take a couple minutes to do that. And when you're done, I was like, let me see if I had, unfortunately, we both can't share at the same time. So, but I want to make sure that I'm very specific in my explanation. When you're done, what I want you to put in the chat, I just want you to share, I want you to reflect on how you socially identify. And then as you review your map, in the chat, I want you to share how does the way you identify show up in your interactions with others? Maybe one or 2 sentences, nothing really long, but just, tell us what your top identifier was and how you think how the way you identify, how it shows up in your interactions with other people, the way maybe you even see the world, maybe not just how you interact, but also just how you feel about your place in this world. I remember someone in the chat, I read there, I forgot exactly the 6 words, but what they essentially said was the way they show up in the world as a multiracial individual, they feel like they don't fit in anywhere, right? That their acceptance level causes them to always think about kind of how they show up in the world because they don't have a footing anywhere because they're multiracial, right? So that has to really cause this duality of thinking that possibly could even contribute to some type of stressors, right? In the ways that they show up or interact with people because that's how they see the world, their perspective. So again, do your bubble map, and then I want you to share a little bit about you know, how do I show up in the world? How do I interact based on the way I socially identify? Because that has a direct correlation in emotional intelligence of how you interact, but also about whether or not you are really self-aware, and how that self-awareness plays into your DEI work, your DEI frame of mind. So Catherine, if you'll keep an eye on the chats for me. Man of God, I just saw that myself, so I'll just say it out loud. Oh, I see a bunch. They went too fast for me, Catherine.
Trying to get off mute and get everything done at the same time. All right, so we have, of course, man of God. We have, I try to always treat everyone with everyone the way I want to be treated. Kindness is key. And if you all can see this on my screen, I will not read it out loud for the sake of reading to people who are perfectly capable. Another one says organizational commitment when organization is afraid to fully embrace D&I. Black first, women second, professional third, attractive fourth, intelligent fifth, positive sixth, and lastly, funny. Female, always focused on actions that make me equal to males. My top identifiers are Black woman. I show up in the world aware of what that may mean to others. This consideration impacts the way that I purposely present myself, often finding myself trying to disprove the biases of others. Someone else says, I blend in easily and I'm usually not noticed unless I want to be. Another one says, a free spirit, follower of Christ. I am a woman who enjoys often, typically female, activities like socializing, connecting, laughing. Shall we continue or is this good?
I think there weren't that many, right? I think there was only like maybe 10.
A couple more.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, oh, we're getting lots of ones, yes. Let's see. Someone says, my top identifier was labeled as large Black man, although as I navigate and interact with others, it clearly depends on the social groups that I'm involved in that will relate to how I am viewed in the world. Someone else says Black, I show up strong, articulate, open and honest, compassionate of others, always cognizant of my presentation to show my worth. Someone else says white, male, healthy, polite, graying, nondescript. Another one is a peer, Christian, Afro-American woman, older person. Black woman, strong, educated, open-minded, giving. Another says obese woman, obese woman is the way I believe others first see me. I know this isn't often talked about, but that's what I believe. Being a mom tends to overshadow a lot of my identifications. And lastly, follower of Christ, created in the image of God, as all people are. Female, have a disability, which allows me to understand the value of others' struggles.
Awesome. Thank you, Catherine. Can I reshare my screen now?
Absolutely. Let me unshare. All right.
Okay. So let me share my screen. I think that's it. Okay. Share. So let's see, current slide. Okay. So the reason I was talking about and wanted you to reflect on that, how you show up in the world, because the ways in which we show up impact not only how we see ourselves, but it also impacts our worldview perspectives, our knowledge of other cultures, right? Because so for instance, you know, the very first thing I would say is, oh, I'm African American, right? So right there, that's my cultural knowledge framework. That's how I identify. So that's the primary thing that I see as far as culture that I have an affinity towards, because that is my top social identifier. And so to be culturally intelligent, I have to also make sure that I have an awareness and a cultural knowledge of other people. And culture spans a lot of different things, right? You know, when I think about this, having grown up, I've bounced around like all over the country for school and work and a whole bunch of different things, but I was born and raised in Northern Virginia. And I always say, the one good thing about that, you know, having grown up in that area, is that there were a lot of people from all over the world. And so you don't know what you don't know. Like I always tell my mom, I was like, you don't know that you don't like certain foods until you go somewhere else and the messaging changes. You don't know that that there's even racism. I always say that growing up, oftentimes parents would, shield their kids from, sexism, racism, a lot of different things. And so until it's really introduced to you, and your cultural knowledge framework changes, you don't know what you don't know. And so if you have knowledge of other cultures, it allows you to become more intelligent and you're able to navigate the world in different ways. Cross-cultural skills, your adaptability, your empathy, ability to deal with uncertainty, right? And your relational skills and your actual perceptual acuity, your ability, right, to perceive and have perceptions about what you're seeing and what you're feeling. And so when you're doing DEI work, the interesting part is, I think sometimes people believe, particularly in roles where you're the subject matter expert, there's this belief system that you are going to be a subject matter expert on all things diverse. And the thing that I have really embraced is that everything's not my lived experience. And so because it isn't my lived experience, other people get to be experts in their life journey and my story so that I can grow, so that I can learn. And so my job is then to facilitate that information from their lived experiences to be able to then help other people become more adaptable and empathic. And so I think to have high cultural intelligence means not to say that you are all things to all people at all times, but it's to be able to say, but I can be adaptable, I can be open, I can deal with the uncertainty of not knowing and the honesty to own that I don't know. And that I am willing to have those relational skills and to develop those relational skills so that I can learn more, right? And then last but not least, to have high cultural intelligence, you need cultural metacognition, right? That is awareness of your cultural context, right? That's just saying, I'm looking around, understanding that everything isn't for me, everything's not about me, and that is okay. I am open to that. And being aware of that cultural context enough to be able to say that, let me just soak up what's happening around me and let me think about like what I'm saying and doing so that I, in fact, can grow from this experience. You will hear me say a lot, this journey in DEI is just about growth. It's about evolution. It's about willing to learn. And it's about knowing that, progress, not perfection. Nobody is perfect in this space, and you will reduce a lot of stress and you will be able to help a lot more folks if you understand that we're not going to be perfect at everything and we're going to make some mistakes. And so I had one last thing. And so because part of that cultural intelligence is recognizing where my biases lie, right? That bias is a dirty word. People are really uncomfortable with the word of bias, but at the end of the day, we all bring them to the table. I mean, it is what it is. Bias, people talk about privilege, those two things, that privilege to be able to have a circle of influence where we can be exclusive to people. You name me one person who does not have any biases, and I will name a person who's a liar. And having a bias is not wrong if you understand where it's coming from and whether or not it's harmful. I always say I have a bias towards vegetables. I prefer French fries, right? Technically it's a potato, so in my mind it's still a vegetable. But the point is, I have a bias towards that. That's okay. It doesn't harm anybody. What we're talking about is how we show up in the world. Does that bias keep other people from being able to experience the equity that they deserve to have? And so sometimes the ways in which we craft our life, the way our circle of influence may look, will impact whether or not we are living a biased existence that's persistent and harmful to other people. So what I want you to do is, I have this activity and I'm going to unshare, and Catherine's going to share. It's called the Trusted 10. So what you're going to do, hold on, I'm going to stop sharing. And I promise this is my last activity because we're almost done. But the point of the activities also is for those who are practitioners, is I want you to have access to various activities that you can even do with people to help them start navigating these tough conversations in a way that feels safer than you coming at them with theories, because I had a whole bunch of, Catherine will tell you, I had a whole bunch of theories, and I will talk a little bit about Miller and Rolnick, you know, and I had like a couple other things, but I thought that's not really what people need. People are looking for practical applied ways to be able to address some of the organizational challenges that they have. And so this particular, I can't even see it from here, sorry. This particular activity is called the Trusted 10. We don't have time for 10, but think of the top 3 people in your circle of influence, and just really quick jot down the 3 names, what their ages are, what their genders are. I have my glasses on. Catherine, can you read it? I can't really see from here. Sexual orientation, sorry.
Race, ethnicity. We have a column for political views, religious beliefs, marital status, and lastly, education.
Now, mind you, you aren't going to share that part, but what I'll have you share just really quick in the chat is, all I want to know is, when you look at your circle of influence, is it homogenous or not? Is it diverse or not? And I don't mean your family. I mean people outside of like your familial trust. When you think of your top 4 or 5 friends, the people that you go to when you have a problem, who you're closest with, who you spend the most time with, who have the greatest influence on how you see the world, what does that look like? And I want you to be honest, because that's part of this whole journey of self-reflection and self-awareness. So I'll give you 2 minutes. And what I'll ask you to do is just tell me, was your circle, when you think about the term diversity, everyone being present, right? So everyone means we live in a world where people come with a lot of difference, a lot of uniqueness. Is that what your circle looked like? And there's no judgment, I'm just asking. Catherine, I saw 1 comment pop up so far. Pretty homogenous. Yep, my circle's very diverse.
I'm slower over here. We have partial diversity, 25%, pretty homogenous. My circle is not very diverse. It is diverse, but it takes work to keep it that way over time.
Yeah, there it is. Intentionality, right? We keep talking about impact and intentionality. Not diverse.
Not diverse.
Yep.
The more not diverse circles. Not diverse except for age. My circle is not very diverse. My circle of influence is more diverse at home, at work than at home, diverse at work only. Diverse in some ways, age and sexual orientation. Another one says all Black women around 45 to 55 years of age with varying cultural backgrounds. We have diverse in education and marital status. Someone else is very diverse. And then lastly, we have diverse except for sexual orientation.
Okay. I'll take a couple more in my circles because I know people are still working on it, thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. My circle is somewhat diverse, mostly age, sexual orientation, and education. Another comment says, my best friend, another race, but most others are the same race, mixed political, different ages, not as diverse with religion. And then we have, looks like the last one says, not very diverse.
Right. And so, and I'm going to have you unshare, sorry. So, because I'm going to wrap up my presentation because I know we got to go. Thank you. Let's see, share. And so thinking about those comments, right, as they still kind of come in, that's the interesting part, right? A lot of us on here are either the practitioners or people who are passionate about the work. And think about how many of us had to own that even our own personal circles of influence really weren't that diverse, or that we had to also own that we had to be intentional about that, because when we're not intentional about it, we have this affinity, and that affinity has direct impacts, right, on how we hire people, how we recruit people, right, in the workplace. There is a translation, right, in how we then do business, because we have this affinity towards the people that are like us, that are like-minded. And so the challenge becomes then our emotional intelligence. There's a challenge there because unfortunately, we have the same worldview perspective and we're not pushing ourselves to think about the world from a different lens. an equitable lens, because everybody is like us. So we want to have people that are like us. And that was the point, is that even for those of us who have done this for a long time, we have to be intentional and impactful holistically, because otherwise we're always going to be taking in the same information. I know someone said this earlier and I found it interesting. I think they said they felt that the presentations earlier were really had a focal point of race. And, and that's that person, that's the way they receive the information. And I completely honor that. And so, that has the potential for, again, people coming at it from a different lens, maybe that person, the way they perceive the information, but also maybe it's the way the information is delivered. I don't really know. I can't, I'm objective and I come down the middle because I can only speak for what my experiences are. But my experiences are influenced by the conversations I have, by the people I trust, by the conversations, the materials I read, the shows I watch. And so the reason why I'm asking you to think about this, and these are important activities to bring to the workforce when you're trying to get people to buy into the DEI initiatives, you have to appeal to where they are in their evolution of self-awareness. We can't keep dropping diversity trainings on people on strategic plans and not have people really think about the ways in which they see the world. And so I don't know why it's, okay, there it is. And then I just wanted to end really quick, because I know some people are really, they're just like, what's the bottom line? Productivity, and so Dr. Travis Bradbury talks about the importance of emotional intelligence, and that one of the biggest things that people who have emotional intelligence that's really high or high EQ have a tendency to make $30,000 more per year, studies show, right? 400% of those individuals who have managers with high emotional intelligence, 400% are less likely to leave their organization if their managers have high EQ. It is important, folks, for us to not like walk away from this idea that we really need to be more self-reflective and self-aware of the ways in which we show up in our space. And so if you're not interested at all from the motivation of wanting to think of it from a social emotional perspective, then think about it as a person, as a leader, from dollars and cents. It costs a lot of money for you to have to recruit a diverse workforce, to get headhunters, to get consultants. But you know what? If you can just start working from a space of emotional intelligence and thinking about the ways in which you can increase that self-management, self-regulation, that social awareness, and build that out into your team plans, into your strategic planning, your DEI plans from a cultural intelligent place, you can also save your organization money. And so last but not least, I used to teach positive psychology. And so I think a lot about happiness, and that is an extremely subjective idea, right? Happiness, what makes happiness? What does that look like? But the one thing that everyone who does this work in positive psychology looks at what Lomborsky has to say about what it takes to be happy. And so what we've learned is that people have a set point, right? And I say, like, for those of us in behavioral healthcare, we all talk about depression, right? And depressive states and how those can be inherited. And so we have sort of this genetic predisposition to depression. Well, there are also those in positive psych who say, hey, I posit the idea that we have a predisposition towards happiness, and that's 50% of who we are. There's a set point, and our happiness is kind of, just dependent on like who we are genetically. But then 10% is out on the circumstances, right? And I thought that was interesting, that circumstances was a really small percentages of attributing to our happiness levels. But 40% was intentional activity. And that, my friends, is what I'm saying about how that translates into DEI programs. You have to be intentional for things to work out at your organization. You have to be intentional if you want to be emotionally intelligent. You have to be intentional with the activity, with the programs, with the strategic planning, with your recruitment, with your hiring, with your promotion. All of these things, you have to be intentional with that activity in order for you to create the culture of inclusivity and belonging that you're looking for. And last but not least, I forgot to finish that slide, but Darn Cat is a spinoff of Miller and Rolnick's motivational interviewing. And so I just wanted to share that, people were talking this morning and they were sharing that, it's really, it can be difficult. What can I do, to bring some DEI to my organization, to be a change agent? And so one of the things that Darn Cat talks about is that you have to do an assessment of where people are at your organization first before you can move forward. So Miller and Rolnick have what they call motivational interviewing. For those who aren't familiar, it is a structured form of interviewing. It's a semi-structured, a semi-structured way. And so what they do is, usually when you're trying to do stay interviews or exit interviews, you could use this form of semi-structured interview guides. And what you do is you have, 3 main topics or 4 things that you're interested in, but you allow the fluidity of having right? So you have these questions that are going to be structured, but then you have 3 or 4 like probing questions that you can use to get more information from the individuals that work from you or that are leaving the organization. And that can help you assess, and you can do this with DEI, that can help you assess where people are in their desire to be there. And so it helps you also because when you're having cross-cultural questions and conversations, it allows those individuals to speak in a more free-form way instead of sort of these structured questionnaires that may not fit all groups of individuals, right? When you have semi-structured interviewing, it really lends itself to being able to have a conversation with diverse populations in a way that you can extract a lot of information to be able to formulate meaningful DEI programs. So Darn Cat stands for the desire. You have to make sure that people have a desire to even want to change, to even want to invest and buy into this program. And do they have the ability? I have learned in my time and in my work that oftentimes people just don't have the tools yet. They don't have the strategies built to be able to do this work. They don't have the background, they don't have the foundation. And so you have to make sure they even have the ability to do it, that you understand and that they understand the reasons why it's important. And if they have the need, do they have the need and their capacity to even want to make the change, to even want to invest in DEI, to do the equity work? And then the commitment, are people committed to it? That's the next step, right? You have these precursories on the continuum. And then once you can get past those like precursor ideas, desire, ability, reasons, and need, then you have to make sure people are committed. Like, am I committed to a DEI program? Is my organization, right? Because as leaders, they have to be in a committed place that we actually want to change. We actually want DEI here, and then actuation, right? Am I ready to take action? And then if I have that readiness to put something into action, then I will actually take the steps. And so, I can share like the information around Darn Cat, like the actual theoretical underpinnings, but I just wanted to give you kind of a glimpse into there are ways that you can actually move this work forward that does not require you to have all of these difficult conversations that make it so that people want to resist what you're trying to do at the agency. So I know we have to go. I apologize for going so long because I know that people may have had questions, but I will make sure that when I post this, my email's on here. If you have any questions, I think Megan's going to post the presentation. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for participating and sharing and allowing this to be a safe space of learning. Catherine, I'm done.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Mobley. For everyone who did ask those questions, I'll be sure to collect them and get them to Dr. Mobley. Between Megan and myself, we'll get them out there and she'll be able to answer them and hopefully get them posted in a centralized place for that, those answers. Thank you again, Dr. Mobley. I have once again learned so much, hearing progress over perfection and remembering that we are each other's experiences, we make up each other's experiences, has just been immensely helpful. I know you already said it, but just always like to ask again, it's okay for everyone if they need to reach out to you? Is it okay for them to contact you via email? Wonderful, fantastic. All right, so if we are ready, we're going to move right on ahead. And I am going to introduce our third and final speaker of the day, who is Mr. Siyum Burhi. Mr. Burhi is the Virginia State Refugee Coordinator and Director of the Office of New Americans at the Virginia Department of Social Services. Before coming to DSS, he was Director of the Catholic Charities, Migration and Refugee Services for 15 years. Siyum was born in a small village in East Africa. prior to coming to the United States to study in the seminary on a scholarship. He is a practicing interpreter and translator and an experienced trainer and mediator accustomed to working with culturally diverse communities to facilitate dialogue towards resolving conflict. If you all have any questions, please use the chat, and Mr. Berhe will address those questions if we have time at the end. Mr. Berhe, over to you.
Thank you so much. And let me see if I know you can probably see me and I can't see you, or both. I'm trying to figure if I can put my camera on. Let me see. I'm trying, but I don't see my. Okay, let me see. Technology, come on. At least can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Berhe,
Okay.
we can absolutely hear you. Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm really going to try to share and put my face on the screen so you can identify me if you see me in the village where I was born. But anyway, that's okay. If you can help me with that, would be great. If not, I'm going to keep trying to share my screen. Why?
It's Megan. Let me see if I can pull it up for you, and we'll just go from there. So if you'd like to just introduce yourself, and I'll work on getting that pulled up for you.
Wonderful.
Sure.
And thank you. And believe it or not, the camera was working until it came to my time. Okay. Well, let me start as a. I'm going to leave the mental health piece for the experts on mental health. And what I'm going to try to do today at 3 o'clock, and thank you. And if you allow me to move them, I will be, I guess, can probably move.
You may have to let me know how.
Okay, let's go to the page, the second one, please. Cool. Wonderful. Again, it's 3 o'clock. The good news, the bad news. The good news is you don't have to drive 3 hours back home. So I know you're not leaving right now. The bad news is 3 o'clock, depending what kind of lunch you have. If you're dozing, I will try to make a large noise or anything to wake you up. Now, what I want to do is, I'm not going to define refugees and immigrants. And I know Dr. Kobe was talking about DEI, and if we find DEI challenging in a community that have similar language, similar cultural background, similar different history, imagine, if you may, for people who are coming from all over the world and trying to embrace equity and strategies to advance equity to reduce disparities in our Virginia community. Virginia is home to many refugees and immigrants who come from different countries because of violence, forced displacement, and violation of all kinds that some of it we don't want to even imagine. And as I have put it on the top, my responsibility today, my plan today, is to touch on some of the amazing baggage they come with from all over the world. Very complex baggage that they carry on their back. And if we're going to do anything to move them to integration, move them to be welcomed, move them to be part of this society, because they're not guests, they're going to be here, they are our next neighbors, next door neighbors, we must understand and interpret not only their language, but their emotional feelings accurately which is a huge challenge. But if we don't do that, their lives depend on our interpretation of their cultural norms about their feelings and their background. So while I believe in cultural humility, which is not an end in itself, it's a process, but I also believe very seriously on cultural intelligence. I think Dr. Kobe just mentioned that, and I was really laughing because I have put that as part of the goal. What does that mean? I want you to imagine, if you may, you decided to go to a place you have never been to, a place you have never read about, just because you were curious. There was no violence. You were not forced to go, but you decided. And by the way, let me add, you didn't have a phone with you. Oh, let me add another one. Your 3 kids were with you.
Uh-oh, did we lose you, Mr. Burhi? Can anyone hear me?
I can. There are some storms in the area. I wonder if he's being affected by them. Let's give him a moment.
Absolutely.
Okay. Right. Well, if we can't get him back right away, we'll take a quick break.
All right, just take a couple seconds, everyone, and give
Yeah,
Mr.
we'll
Burhi
we'll
a
try.
second.
We'll shoot for another 3-minute break or so, and then we will try to get him back on the line. In the meantime, it looks awfully dark outside my window, so we could be experiencing some of that. So let's make sure that we are back at let's do 3:10 for anyone who is ready for a break anyway. So we'll see you in about 4 minutes.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, we can hear you. Hello.
Okay. It took, I don't know what happened. It just disappeared, and my camera is actually also working, I hope.
Yes, it is working. I did let people
That's okay.
stand up and take a quick break because I don't know about you, but it is looking dark and stormy out my window.
And I could hear you, but I knew you couldn't hear me. So here we are. Okay. Oh boy.
Maybe if you'd like to back up just a little bit on the slide, then the folks who did stand up and stretch their legs could join us at without missing any of your words.
Okay, cool. And can you, do you still see, let me see if I can upload my slide because I don't see.
Would you like me to stop sharing?
Let me see if I can, otherwise I'm going to ask you to, but.
Sure.
Okay, no. You don't see my No, then please continue, because I can work on my computer by moving it, and I can tell you when, so it's okay. If
Sure, yeah, no problem. Let's do it together.
okay, thanks.
Mhm. Oh no, my little son is sick.
Uh,
Yeah. Okay, let's try that. Is that working?
yep, it is.
All right, whenever you're ready.
I am actually. So I will just, I'm not quite sure where I stopped, but I was telling people if they went to an island or a country that they have never heard of. I think that might be where it stopped. So I'll just do that one really fast.
Thank you.
Are we ready?
Yep, let's go.
Okay. Sorry, everyone. I don't know what happened to my internet, and I hope it doesn't happen again. I was trying to share with you how difficult it is to actually work on DEI with people coming from all over the world. And I wanted to give you an example of any one of you deciding one day, out of nowhere, decided to go to a small place around somewhere in the world that you have never read, you do not know. And of course, you didn't take your phone. Technology was left behind. And I even was cruel enough to tell you that you have to take your 3 kids with you so that you will not be meditating by yourself. You go there, you get to the hotel, nobody speaks English, nobody have heard about United States, and you did not have a phone to interpret, so you got stuck. Now, and you got there not because anyone was hunting you, anyone was trying to kill you, or for any human rights challenges. You just went there because you want to take a break. And yet, how difficult would it be? And I want you to come back and understand people coming from all over the world, mainly trying to escape genocide, war, and every possible crime against them. And they come here to find some peace. Now, immigrants and refugees in Virginia are our next door neighbors. I want to frame that, and I want us to think that as we're going through what I want to share with you. Now, I am a Virginian, but where do I come from? I'm also going to tell you, I do have some multiple identities, multiple personalities, and the counselors in there, I can see looking at me like, oops, what's up now? What are we going to do? What he's going to say? No, I'm actually trying to access the emotional identities I have seen in people from all over the world, what I might have heard through my 26 years of work with refugees, or what I might have seen. So I'm going into an arena that I'm thinking of so many people from so many parts of the world, and I just want to touch on a few things, just a sample. I came from one of the Southeast Asian countries. I might have come from Kosovo, Iran, Syria, Iraq, or Somalia. I came from Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Liberia, or DRC. I might have come from Mexico, or from one of the indigenous communities in Central and Southern America. I might have come from Sudan, Northern Ethiopia, and Tigray, Eritrea. And that means I have some real serious questions that keep coming at me. And if you can go to the next slide. Keep going. Now, there are so many serious questions I have as a person coming from all those countries and more that I shared with you. But I also want to tell you right now, before we even get those complex issues, we do have a global trauma right now. And I want to touch on that because I know you're going to hear this, you're going to see this with immigrants and refugees who are your next door neighbors. And it's going to say, when they get here, They're going to say, do I have to take another vaccine? And they might really say, okay, you know what? Why are they vaccinating us? I want you to know, as America of the past does not have the most admirable historical facts about vaccination. And those things are heard all over the world. So they're thinking, are they going to vaccinate me because they don't want me have any children? I know many of us will look at them and say, what's wrong with this? Yes, but there is a reason. There is history behind a negative history, fact or fiction. I'm not going to go there, but they have heard a lot. And I have heard that. Oh, they're trying to make sure that we don't have children. So look at how many complex issues that we might not have ever thought will come up when it comes to vaccination. And the other question they would ask is, will they look down on me because I took vaccination somewhere in East Africa or Asia or South or Central America? Because obviously they don't think we have any reasonably good medical system. So that doubt is in some of these people. So the global trauma because of COVID in itself brings challenge of making sure that our next door neighbor, refugees and immigrants are not just welcomed, but embraced and are treated as equals. And they are included in our discussion because, as I said earlier, they are not guests. If you can go to the next. I do want to also show you our next door neighbors are all over the state. Look at the percentage. I know many of you are coming from Northern Virginia, and look at the percent, 68.1% in Northern Virginia are foreign born. I want you to spend a second looking at our Commonwealth. When we talk about refugees and immigrants, an integral part of our community, the number also shows it's big. The reason I show you this is I don't want anybody to think it's just few people here and there. It's not. But again, while they're all over our Commonwealth, sometimes they don't have a say in many things that are happening in our communities. When they come to this country, they have so many questions, as I mentioned to you. As I told you, I'm from everywhere, and I might be from Rwanda, and I might be a multi-ethnic Hutu, Tutsi person saying, are those people who killed my family, will they know where I am? Are they in the United States? What power do they have over me? I'm a Muslim from Syria, from Iraq. Will I be allowed to pray 5 times a day? Will my American neighbor think I'm a terrorist? How will I behave as an American? What is it really? Am I going to abandon my culture, my language? And if I am from Afghanistan as well, I told you I have multiple identities. The Afghans who have been here for 30 years, when they see me, are they going to see a traitor because I worked with the US military? How will I deal with them? I'm a young woman from northern Ethiopia right now with war. How am I going to tell the American friend about the rape I have gone through? Will she tell other people? Am I going to share this with my husband? Or the same woman from any country meets her counselor at some event, and the counselor, because of the privacy and individual rights, she might just say hi to her like everybody else. You're going to say, so-and-so, I thought she was my friend. She's not even talking to me as my friend. I have to stop sharing anything with her. How about an LGBT person coming from Middle East, where the word itself is not even allowed to be spoken? Will I be free in the United States? Are they going to treat me the same way? All these questions are critical to prepare us to make sure we work with our refugees and immigrants. If you can keep 2 of them, because we have gone through, keep 1 more. Okay. Now, when it comes to refugees, we have a system that has been in place for years. And I just put this map on there, many of you know, just showing you there are agencies who have had experience and expertise working with refugees. And the dots show the Catholic Charities of Diocese of Arlington, CCC, Church World Services, Lutheran Social Services, International Rescue Committee, and Ethiopian Community Development Council. These are experts working with refugees, and anything we do, the federal funding goes to these agencies to help refugees, and anyone working on DEI would be great if you can connect with those agencies who know the culture, who know the language, and who have experience with refugees. Now, this is about refugees, but today in Virginia, we have Office of New Americans that includes refugees and immigrants. The non-refugee immigrants, or those who have been here for more than 5 years, do not have that luxury of going to an agency and getting assistance. How do we work with them? How do we assist them towards the total integration into the American community, to becoming powerful, responsible, active members of our community? So I put this map on there so that everybody can see who they can talk to when it comes to refugees. But the immigrant serving agencies neither get the money from the feds, nor do they have the long history and experience. And we are developing that. And hopefully we can integrate these 2 entities into similar service areas, and we can work together to assist them. Continue, please. As the title of my sharing this presentation with you was my baggage, and this one is an overload. I can tell you this is real. We have so many complex issues, and we have so many baggages that we can't even walk straight. We, meaning refugees and immigrants. My baggage is overload right now. I can tell you, as someone in college, I always went around the security, the campus security, mind you, the campus security to get to my class. I didn't know why. Well, campus security, as you know, do have uniforms, and uniform used to scare the heck out of me freshman year. I did not know. I didn't think. I didn't have time to think. I have to survive. So a bunch of my friends and I would keep walking, and when we get close to the security, I would absolutely go the other way, even though it's a longer way. I still have that map in my head, my campus, meaning there are so many triggers with immigrants and refugees. It could be uniform, the easiest one. It could be July 4th is coming up. What happens that evening? I wonder if we have ever thought how many refugees and immigrants totally do not go to bed that night. The noise they hear to them is bombs. That's what is in those baggages, in one of those baggages. The uniform has done nothing to me, but people who wear uniforms might have, and I was scared of them. So I understand there are so many baggage we carry as we move on the road to integration. And the only way that we can be helped, that we can help, is making sure that each baggage is removed slowly with patience. As we get rid of more baggages, we will start to walk. We will stand tall and straight, because we will not be bending because of all those triggers that have been loaded, because we do not know what is in what baggage, because we didn't put them there. Somebody else did. We're carrying it, but we are responsible to get rid of it. Next slide. Now, at times, we don't even know. When I walked across the campus, I wasn't quite sure it was that soldier, that policeman. That uniform reminded me of. I didn't know. So we're carrying it, we're trying to move on, but we do not know exactly what we're carrying. Now, we will need a professional, a person who have experience, a person who have cultural intelligence, a person who have more than linguistic capacity, because interpretation, language interpretation is challenging, but cultural interpretation is even more challenging. So in order to help us identify the triggers in all these packages, we will all need to work very carefully. And I will touch on some of these later on. Next slide, please. You see, some of them are known: guilt, anger, fear, depression. If you have been the only one in most war zones who escaped out of your friends, there is a lot of guilt. Why me? Why did I survive? And I used to hear a lot about Vietnam War. Soldiers coming home with guilt because they lost their comrade. It's very similar. Anger at people who might have caused that, or you have perceived they caused that. Fear, July 4th is one. Any shot, any noise at any time, any smell of anything might remind you of what. So we need to identify the invisible and heavy baggage filled with triggers and memories, and identifying those and picking one by one, putting it down from the Lord, from the back of a refugee or immigrant, is the first step, welcoming them, and first step working on DEI, because you simply have a long way to even start thinking about DEI until we get rid of all these triggers and baggage we carry. Next slide. And I want to focus on what it is that we need to do. I understand the cultural competency issue. I mean, we talk a lot about it. I understand trained interpreters, please do not use their children. I'm preaching to the choir. I understand that we need to be better at cultural capacity, cultural interpretation. We need to be global, because the saying time will heal, time does not heal at all. After years and years, we'll have the same trigger causing the same confusion and the same pain. Unfortunately, in order to assist our next neighbor, refugee and immigrant, the new American, we call them the new American because that is what they will be in 5 years or so. They're not American yet on paper. In every other way, they have invested their life, but they will have 5 more years. Then they are Americans. So we call our Office of New Americans. In order to help them, the tools we need are the tools that we don't always have access or time or patience for. Extreme patience and understanding is important. I am here to tell you, as Americans, we're not always admired with patience. Why? It's not an insult. I don't take it like that. We are people of action. We like to see results immediately, real fast. 1, 2, 3 step, get the result. What's the outcome? Did you do it? When? How? Well, it takes much longer to unload all this baggage from the back of an immigrant or refugee one by one. We do need to invest time. We need to also invest patience. We have to change the mode that we always have used. Just for the sake of this group, we need to change our way of behavior, the way we solve the problems. It takes much, much longer. They come from areas that people talk forever because they have abundance of time. And those are the ones they are used to. So I'm not saying that we have to completely change our way of life, but we have to be cognizant. We at least need to know, why is it that so-and-so did not show up at my office at 9 a.m.? Time it's really relative. Well, I always talk about sunset, sunrise. Sunrise goes on until what, 10, 11? 9 o'clock is 9 o'clock. It doesn't matter much to many people. Therefore, we have to show them. We have to be patient with them. Yes, we do go by time and we need to, but we need to understand why it is they're not doing it for the next month or two. So patience is going to be really needed. Reading between the lines, we say in the US, but I think reading between silence is important. The rape victim is not, as you all know, going to share what has taken place, the cruelty that she faced. Silence. I was reading a document a few weeks ago, and they were interviewing so many women in the northern Ethiopia now. They would not talk about it. So as they bring them to the hospital, smart, culturally aware doctors were watching how they walk and how they sit, just paying attention to that, because nobody would say anything. It's a taboo. It's not something you share, and yet they realize there are ways to know. So reading between silence is really important. Linguistic and cultural competency is a must. Somebody who has been running away from gangs in Central America or anywhere in Southern America who gets here, how do you know, how long is it going to take this young man to tell us? Because he does not know the result of the information he's going to share with us. A holistic approach, or in the American world, we call it 2-gen. In the refugee world, it's 3-gen actually, because the dominant cultures are expressive. Dominant cultures are verbal. Most minority cultures, where refugees and immigrants arrive from, are indirect, are not verbal. Read between the lines, read between the silence is what happens. Therefore, we have a habit of dealing with that one individual in the family who have suffered, which is good. We have to, I get it. But this isn't always the way that works with most refugees and immigrants. The grandfather, the grandmother, the mom, the daughter, not that you have to share all this with everybody, but everything touches everybody. They live for the family, for the community. Individualism does come, trust me, but it takes long time. So I want to just remind you that to be extremely careful dealing or treating one individual just because the horrible thing has happened to that individual. It's a family, it's a holistic approach. Even if you don't share the information, you have to look at that from overall community and who are their heroes. If you talk to an immigrant or refugee, counseling isn't really popular in their country. The person they go to is the elder. The person they go to is their faith leader. The person they go to is grandma, grandpa. Similar here in a way. And that appreciating that, knowing that, will help us changing our traditional relationship model. Friendship and close communication with the victims. And even if they are not victims, in my world, there is almost no one that is not victim in refugee and immigrant one way or another. But of course, some of the horrific victims, those who have got abused, are not overwhelming majority, but they all come because they're running away from something. And therefore, friendship, care is extremely important. It's not 9 to 5, as you know, and we need to really be prepared to have a long-term relationship, because this person who comes here with all the baggage I have talked about also comes with other baggages that seem very simple. I'll give you a few examples. I have to have a job. I have a family. I need to feed my family. Am I going to get a job? Where am I going to learn English? Am I going to have an apartment? Basic need issues, if they're not fulfilled, they become part of the baggage of triggers, because now they're going to be dependent on the agency that I shared with you, or on their friends or relatives. So once we take care of that, then we can move into deeper, long-term DEI, and integration becomes the central theme. But we can't do that until we fulfill the basic need of all those people who have come here. And language access becomes extremely important. Cultural understanding becomes important. But patience and investing time as they move on the road toward this integration also becomes very important. Next. I just want to make sure I give enough time, because I can talk for hours, those of you who know me, but I want to leave there and give a chance for people who might have a question, because I think they're going to have a question and answer for all the three speakers, but I do want to give enough time for that. So thank you. If you have questions, my speaker is working, even my video is working now. So thank you. Let me stop there.
Thank you so much, Mr. Berhe. You do have a question here. This question says, can you discuss the feelings of fear, resistance, and lack of support that refugees and those whom are from South America, Middle Eastern, or European countries feel related to seeking mental health services in the United States?
Excellent question. Thank you. Culturally, mental health services are new even in our United States here. So most countries that you mentioned, mental health services are either just starting or probably don't even exist. So you basically, if you tell your mental health counselor something, and you are coming, let's say, from Central America, and you are an undocumented, is that person going to share your information with anybody? Will someone hear about it? Is he going to be arrested? So that's the security issue is real. The second one, if the community and their family know that this person is going to counselor, the culture I came from, when I was in high school at least, they referred counseling as like, if anybody goes to counselor, they call it like he got crazy. So there is a really bad image of seeking mental health. So it has to, in a way, be done in a very secure, because there is fear of information leaking out to the police, to law enforcement, but also to a family, to the community, because it just have a bad image. I'm going to give you one example, just because hopefully none of you know my family, so I'm going to say without naming name. My sister-in-law came from a war zone. Have seen things I can't say here. So I was telling my dear sister-in-law, you need to see a counselor. Can I help you get them? She said, I'm not crazy. This woman has been here for 20-something. And I'm trying to find a way, don't you tell her, I'm trying to find a way, somebody who is really good at that, introduce her in a community setting in any way, and develop friendship so that she can get some indirect help. Because publicly, she will not go and spend time with a counselor, because if somebody in the family feels, oh, she's not doing well, she is seeing a counselor. So the security issue, the cultural issue, more importantly, is really, really challenging. I hope I answered some of it. If I didn't, ask again and see if there is an angle I can touch on.
Thank you, Mr. Berhe. It looks like we have another question here as well. This
Sure.
question is, what are your suggestions, if any, that our private mental health providers can become more supportive toward reaching out to those communities and providing needed mental health services?
A very good question again. Now, having worked with refugees for 26 years, having been a director of refugee resettlement, I have a very soft heart towards the refugee resettlement agencies. I would say building relationship with the refugee resettlement agencies, because the refugees can trust the agencies. They're really helping them from day one, finding an apartment, find them a job, find them English language training. So there has been a built relationship with the agencies. I would hope that they learn to work with the agencies in collaboration with that and integrate their mental health assistance with all other holistic approach, with all other unmet needs, so that it's smoothly, kind of without making a big deal, it becomes part of assistance. So I would hope they should really talk to, depending where they are. If they are in the Northern Virginia, please talk to the resettlement agencies, MRS, LSS, ECDC. If they are in Harrisonburg, they should talk to Church World Services, Charlottesville IRC, Richmond CCC, and IRC, Roanoke again CCC, and Newport News CCC. So they should go to a place where refugees are very comfortable and they know the agencies. Now, when it comes to immigrants, I want them to do similar with other though. And hopefully in a month or so, we will have a very good list of the immigrant serving agencies. So Office of New Americans will be able to provide you agencies. I would still work with existing agencies because immigrants trust those who help them, refugees trust those who help them, and you have groundwork already done. So I would always say, work with the others who are working to help refugees in so many ways.
Wonderful. We have some more questions coming in for you, Mr. Berhe. This one starts, is an individual in the mental health system a state facility and was moved to an assisted living but has no funds for medication and does not qualify for Medicaid due to immigration status, knowing that the medication is several $100s a month, where can someone go to be assisted with the cost of medication?
A tough question that I might not have a satisfying answer to at all. I do want to say, and I know I'm not going to give an adequate answer to this one, but I do want to make everybody aware, Virginia have moved in such a phenomenal speed into a very good place. I want to say that. I'm very proud of Virginia. I'm proud as where we're going, but we're not there yet. So what I would do is we have a board for our Office of New Americans. We have staff members who can help you research and find somewhere. I don't offhand, I can't tell you, go here, make a phone call here, but I believe we're moving to the right place, but we have a long way to go. I don't have an answer, but please email me and let me see who can help. It won't be me. I do not know that answer, but it's a very good question. I have a policy person who can dig as deep as it goes. So I will ask her, is all I can tell you.
All right, and one more question here we have in the chat. Are support groups with peers any better accepted than individual counseling?
I believe so, but as I'm sure the person who is asking this question will be aware, that also have to be framed differently. It would really work as long as we don't call it, I know, transparency, that's our culture, but it would work greatly if you can put anything around it. That support group should get together. You know why you're putting them together, but I'm not sure everybody should know. but I know you would go very far with that. So my answer is yes.
All right, fantastic. Does anyone have any last minute questions they'd like to ask Mr. Burhi?
And the only thing I want to say, Catherine, is I apologize for the technical interruption. And I am here to tell you, I speak with my hand, as you can see now. I'm face-to-face person. I really do not like behind the computer. So it was really difficult. This is not what I love doing. I love doing in front of people, face-to-face, with my hands moving and getting up. So sorry for the painful 30 something minutes, but it's an honor to join you guys.
No, it was wonderful, Mr. Burhi. I too am in the boat of doing live in-person trainings when we're all in the vibe in the room together. But I think you did a fantastic job. Thank you so much for sharing more. I've learned so much more about the cultural differences and the challenges that exist in the behavioral mental health sphere, and how we can really just be cognizant of them, and so that we can be effective in how we help our communities of people. That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Ms. Burhi. I know someone wanted to get your email address, so if you could throw that in the chat for everybody, that would be fantastic.
We'll do that.
So thank you so much. Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Burhi. This
Sure.
concludes our speakers for the day. I hope you all enjoyed this as much as I have, and I really hope you feel like you have a far richer and more robust understanding of DEI's purpose and importance in each of these three very specific topics and concepts. Similar to myself, I hope you are full of ideas on how to build a diverse workforce and embrace a culture of belonging throughout your organization that is infused in your service delivery. And now for final instructions, I'll hand this over to Megan McGuire, the Chief Public Relations Officer at DBDH. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Catherine. DMAS is so lucky to have you leading their DEI efforts. We're really grateful for your willingness to spend the afternoon with us. So I have less than 2 minutes worth of final words for you as we wrap up the day. And I just first wanted to mention, this was our first training, or first time transitioning the symposium to a virtual platform. And we really appreciate your patience as we work through some behind the scenes and some not so behind the scenes technical issues. So thank you for that. But I mean, really overall, we're thrilled to be able to deliver this event in this format because it just allows more of you to participate, and that's a really good thing. So next year, we should be able to make a lot of those rough places smoother, and we hope you'll come back again next year and recommend it to your colleagues. So please be on the lookout for that save the date that we send in January or February when we announce the day and the theme of the 2022 symposium. So now I'll just very quickly share a link to a short evaluation. And if I could share my screen very quickly with you. There it is. There we go. Let's see. And then if you can, oops, you can still see the chat there, can't you? Sorry about that. So please take a look at this. We'll also put the link to the SurveyMonkey into the chat. And we'll also make sure that you can see the link to our YouTube video, and that's where we're going to post the recording for you. And the symposium documents and presentations we're going to put on our website at this link. But really importantly, this evaluation link will only be active until June 16th. So that is 1 week for those of you who want to complete your CEOs. There's a very brief evaluation. You enter your email address at the end of the survey, and we email you that CEO certificate. So those of you who would like to get CEUs for this event, please do complete that evaluation within a week. And I've seen the evaluation, by the way, and it is very short. So I finally want to say thank you again to all of the presentations. Thank you to Dr. Mobley, and thank you to Catherine Crosby. We really appreciate your time. Thank you to all of the presenters. We are really grateful for everything that you've done today. And I will leave this slide up for you all to see. And thank you so much for all you do on behalf of all of those that we serve together. Thanks and take care. Bye-bye.